Hello, welcome to the Hirewell Recruiting Insights podcast. I'm your host, James Hornick, partner at Hirewell. Today's topic is about engagement, specifically with technical talent, which anyone who is in hiring or recruiting knows it's very competitive and frankly hard. So joining me is a special guest. He's the co-founder of Human Predictions, which is a technology and data firm focused on enhancing engagement with tech recruiting, Elliott Garms.
Thank you very much, James. Great to be here.
So, Elliot, tell us a little bit about your background. You and I we came from similar places, actually. So, we were both tech recruiters, and we're no longer tech recruiters. We both kind of went different paths, but we're both still very close with it. So, I guess give everyone, just so they have some kind of context in kind of who you are and where your expertise is. Like, what's Human Predictions, and how did you get started and get there?
Cool. My background is, I think, unique in recruiting. A lot of people have the story of like how they accidentally ended up in recruiting. I actually grew up in a family of all recruiters, and so I was around it a lot growing up. I've always been very entrepreneurial, and if I'm being very honest, not the biggest student, or I wasn't great at school, and so our basement was my father's recruiting office. And as a kid, I was spending a lot of time on computers and around recruiting. And so as I got older and more interested in making money, it was something that I had access to start working in high school in the industry. And at that point, started doing data entry for my father, got into sourcing, but really learned the lay of the land at recruiting. And as someone who's very extroverted, took a liking to calling and connecting with strangers. And so I got into the industry in high school and kept pursuing it. My parents wanted me to go to college, so I was recruiting on the side while I started college, and I was able to make my first placement with an engineer my freshman year and get paid for that placement. And so got my parents' blessing to drop out, and from there got started as a tech recruiter, and have really spent my whole career in the industry doing tech recruiting, most of which running an agency much smaller but similar to Hirewell, very focused on tech recruiting. And within that agency, just saw an opportunity with the tools out there and where they were falling short to start building some of our own. And so about 4.5, 5 years ago, started hacking on some internal tooling just to make myself more efficient with tech recruiting. And that hacking turned into some really useful tools that I ended up letting a few recruiter friends try out, and they had success with. And so, building this own internal tool set quickly took on a life of its own, and had a group of recruiters that were getting a lot of value from it. And so about 4.5 years ago, walked away from the service of recruiting and have been focused on building software to help with tech recruiting ever since. And really, Human Predictions is just indexing a lot of public data from sites like GitHub, Stack Overflow, various open source communities, and tying all that data together to give recruiters a lot more interesting data to draw from as they're reaching out to candidates, as well as insights when certain candidates might be more open to opportunities based on how they're updating or behaving online. So it's really a LinkedIn alternative. As a lot of tech folks move away from LinkedIn, we're just trying to stay on top of other communities and other data sources that are useful for recruiters.
So what would you say is the challenge in tech recruiting? Anyone who works in tech recruiting knows it's hard, but you and I have had some interesting discussions about this. How would you describe it, I guess, to lay it up? Like, what's everyone focused on and what should they be focused on?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm very much focused on the sourcing space, and within the sourcing space, for a long time, Boolean has been a huge topic, and it still is. And while I think it's important, I think the evolution has led us to a point where finding candidates, which used to be very hard with the rise of the internet and the rise of social media and the rise of sites like GitHub, finding candidates has gotten easier and easier. But with that, getting them to respond and engage with you has gotten harder and harder. And so I do believe that engagement is something that I think should be talked about more and is really becoming more and more of the core challenge around recruiting. I think I'm obviously biased to tech recruiting specifically, where the demand seems to be much higher than the supply, and so perhaps that plays into it there. But I think as we all get to this point where we have the same database, which is Google, and people are easier to find, with that comes they're much harder to engage with because more and more recruiters are finding them and sending them solicitations or outreach, and so it's more competition. But yeah, with that, I think engagement is something that...
So in defining engagement specifically, like you're talking about, if you're a tech person, if you're a developer, and anyone who's watching this who is a developer, you're just getting spammed, frankly, constantly, right? Like everyone's just constantly hitting up, and every message you get looks pretty much the same. So like when you talk about engagement, like what are some engagement strategies, or what seems to work from the clients you're working with that actually is different than what most recruiters are doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's really just like back to basics, being human. I think we're at the end of this era where everyone, like I challenge everyone to think about their own email inbox every morning. And when you look at your own email, you tend to have a really good handle on, is this a real email from another human that actually wants to talk to me and has said something interesting, or is it a solicitation? Is it sales? Is it someone trying to sell me something? And most are people trying to sell you something. But when you stop and say, hey, I saw you went to college with one of my older brother's good friends. Have you talked to Chris? When you can start drawing these real human connections, you feel something. It's not this well-formatted sales pitch. It's, hey, they know someone in common, or they worked at a company I've worked at. It's real. And so I think
they've done so much research on my public profile, they actually went beyond just kind of the surface level and what my LinkedIn title is or what school I went to or whatever.
Exactly. And so a lot of recruiters are picking up on what they should be doing, but it still lacks that real human element of like, hey, I saw you went to school here. That's great, but...
Everyone sees that.
And everyone's putting that. The more you can kind of relate it to something real of, so that the advice I give, we refer to it as your shortest path to connect with someone. And I think the first thing you should try and do is see the person I'm about to reach out to, do we have anything in common? Have we gone to the same school? Have we lived in the same city? Have we, do we have similar interests that are, talked about on a bio on Twitter or in my Twitter feed? Do we, know any people in common? These are all things that you can use to break the ice. And when they don't exist, I think the second mode is, what is unique about the person? If I don't have anything in common with them, at least what is unique about them? James, you run a really interesting company. I'd love, I'm running a much smaller company, but I'd love to learn from you about some of your experiences here. Could I chat with you? I think asking more real stuff than, hey, I've got a job. Do you want to chat? Let's connect as humans first. And then I think there's a much better chance of being able to work together from more of a recruitment standpoint.
What I think is interesting is that a lot of this has happened, like the demand in technology has just skyrocketed. So because of that, there's this like people in the tech field are feeling what you're talking about, yet other areas of the economy, not necessarily. I think the job economy is good across the board, but we work in a lot of areas. So there's high demand in HR, there's high demand in digital, there's high demand in finance and accounting, but by sheer volume, people aren't getting messaged to death in those other industries like they are in tech specifically. And I think that, I guess there are two parts to that. So one, I think one of the challenges, there's a lot of organizations that, maybe small organizations that don't have tech recruiters or don't have a specific, they might have a recruiter who focuses on lots of different things. And their strategies that may work, and just in terms of kind of basic outreach for an HR position or some sort of position in digital or something like that, may work fine. But when they apply the same thing to tech, it just falls on its face. And that's part of the reason why tech recruiting is hard, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that largely breaks down to just supply and demand. Because there's such a huge demand, there's way more recruiters going after these tech folks. And I think largely in most other verticals, candidates are still flattered and happy to hear from a recruiter and know that there's...
You don't have to be as sophisticated per se.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's nice knowing that, oh, there's other companies out there that would like to hire me and I can make more money and there's advancement for me. But that's so well understood within tech that it isn't flattering. It's annoying. And frankly, a lot of the outreach that tech folks get is what I would say disrespectful because of how lazy the people sending it and putting it together are. They're not even doing the base layer of research.
Yeah.
And they're sending a lot of tech people stuff that they're not even a fit for. And that's where, some of the bad actors in recruiting give good recruiters a bad name, but it's happening a lot. And so even if you are a good recruiter, understanding that people are getting so inundated, I think could help you write.
And I think anyone in HR and recruiting who's watching this can understand that, because if you're good at what you do and you have the best intentions and you're trying to solve a problem, bring value, you still have the same initial difficulties, and you have to be in front of someone and actually interact with them for them to see the difference between what you're doing versus someone who's just trying to close a deal to make a buck and whatnot. Someone who's thinking long-term, value proposition for you and who they're working for. So that's always our biggest challenge and my biggest challenge is always like, how do you set yourself apart? And it's really difficult to do until you're actually in front of somebody, but it doesn't start there. It always starts in some sort of initial outreach, which is not in person.
Yep.
So.
And I think that the simplest advice I would give is don't start with a job opportunity. I don't think, another thing I've been telling folks is I don't think tech people feel the need to have a recruiter help them change jobs. I think they know they can change jobs and have advancement, but I believe that most tech people do want a few good recruiters in their network that they know they could trust and have them kind of keep them up to speed on what's going on in their certain market or with things they're interested in. And so I think a lot of recruiters reach out very short-sighted with a job, which no one really feels the need in tech to, I could get a job whenever I want. I know that. I don't need a job, and therefore those emails aren't interesting. I do like knowing some folks in Chicago where I'm based that are very plugged into the market that if I have a relationship with, they could keep me up to speed. And so
there is so much happening that if you're working your job in development or whatever, like 24/7, like you would know of some of the things, but there's just so many new companies popping up, you wouldn't be able to know about it. And that's really what the value of a good recruiter is having their pulse and finger to the pulse of the market, just letting you know what's out there. So.
Yep. And I believe a lot of tech people want that, and they want those relationships.
Yeah.
But I don't think many recruiters are reaching out to tech folks saying, hey, James, let me get to know you so I can maybe help you down the road. But I want to first get to know you. Yeah. Most recruiters are reaching out. Hey, I've got a job. Do you want it?
I think it's. I don't want to name names, but I kind of do. It's how the industry has always been structured, though. It's a very old school industry. It's an industry that came from, the largest players in the space that are doing all the hiring out of college are, boiler room environments that are having people make 100 calls a day and focused on your monthly numbers and sell hard close tactics, and everything's still very old school. And I think the issue is that there's a lot of good people who come out of those firms, but not most of them still wash out. Even the recruiters in those types of firms that are taught those tactics that lead to that bad experience that so many like the developers and those types have, even they're so disillusioned by it. The fall off percentage after 1 or 2 years is pretty high. So I think it's almost a systemic thing of where the industry is with some of the players that are doing all the initial kind of hiring and have the most people making most of the calls and most of the initial outreach and all that type of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, which is very true, but again is tied to the reality of the market. There's people hiring those companies because they need positions filled too. So it's just so much opportunity that is going unfilled for everybody. And it's interesting too because I think it was right around the same time you started your company. I started the marketing recruiting division here at Hirewell, and it's like night and day. Like the challenges of and the more we have 5 different teams now, and it's interesting because each division has their own challenges that are kind of specific. And like recruiting I'm a believer if you're a good recruiter, you could recruit in any space, but there'd be some ramp up time. You have to learn kind of aspects of it. But like marketing, like tech, it's easy to locate people in tech, but like you said, it's hard to engage with them. That's the challenge. Whereas I think in digital, it's harder to locate people who are specific matches. They may have all the Boolean keywords. They might say SEO specialist in their profile, but like the types of companies they work with, the size of the budgets, the types of business problems they solve, like that's not even in a LinkedIn profile. That has to be a one-on-one conversation for you to actually engage with that to understand if it's going to fit something. So it's like they're easier to maybe engage with on that first level conversation, but then it takes another level of understanding if they're actually a fit for something. Whereas in tech, I think I don't want to say it's easier to know if someone's a fit from a skill standpoint, but Boolean, that's the one thing it does right is help you locate people, but then it's a matter of, like you said, the engagement piece. So anyway. Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing to unpack because I would argue one of the biggest problems with tech is recruiters hitting up engineers about positions focused around languages that they worked with 10 years ago, but that a Boolean string would absolutely match them with. And so it's almost, that's the curse of tech is these non-technical people think, oh, they have Java on their resume, they must want my Java job.
True.
Little do they know they just studied Java in college and haven't touched it since. And so almost tech would be way better off if they took the digital approach of talk to your candidates first and get to know them before assuming your Boolean string determines their fate.
That's a good point. One thing I kind of want to talk about too is getting into just the changing patterns and kind of communication styles because we've seen it a lot too. And we were talking about this kind of an end of the year thing and the new trends we saw in LinkedIn usage. People with one category is in-mails, one category, completely separate category is your first connection messages and people you're connected with, then talking about email, then talking about things like SMS and text. And it's been happening for a couple of years now, but just the different changes in patterns. And I think that you and I have talked about this before, but I think in-mails are completely dead. I think that it's probably the least effective way of engaging with anyone. I know LinkedIn's going to hate to hear that because that's their big money maker, but I think anyone at this point, whether they're in tech or whether they're in something else, anytime you see an actual in-mail, it just, it's spam. This person doesn't know you, and because you just get so many of those messages that are such bad sales pitches, and they look different in your box that if that's your main method of outreach, you're behind the eight ball before you even start.
Yep.
I was going to say first connection messages. I think they're much. I guess the challenge is the connect and pitch is what's killing that slowly and surely. I think that people are definitely more apt to get back to you if you're first connected with them. But I think, and I hate admitting this, but 3 years ago I was doing the connect and pitch when no one else was doing it yet, right? It's an embarrassment now, so sorry about that. But at that point in time, it wasn't. Now it's the point where it's so prevalent, where someone connects with you and maybe asks you a question which is just completely inane and off the wall, and you're like, all right, sales pitch is coming up as soon as I make an answer. So. But I don't know. So I don't know if you have any thoughts. We're seeing a lot of people engaging over text messages. Some people find it annoying, but I think it's pretty much if you're not using SMS as part of your strategy, at least in terms of kind of following up with people, because it's definitely faster, you're kind of missing the boat there. But I don't know if there's any trends you've seen.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing the LinkedIn trends. Again, very biased around tech, but a lot of tech people we're seeing aren't formally deleting their profiles. They're just what we kind of refer to as abandoning LinkedIn, where it still exists. We're just not seeing new skills get added. We're seeing response rates over in-mail drop. So definitely seeing those trends. Personal email we see a lot of success with for recruiting, but there's a definite caveat there of engineers are extremely numb to spam. So if you spam personally, we're big on less is more, and let's use public data to be more human. Let's use the amount of data available to send less email, but to the right people at the right time. And so we're seeing a lot of success over personal email, but we're also really pushing our users to not copy and paste messages or use templates or push stuff. And so I think personal email, I personally come from an extremely, tech recruiter, no spam world where I've built a career not cold calling people. And I think when I was, building that brand, it was very much the peak of developers are sick of getting cold called at work. They don't have their own phones at work. It's creating really, so I've always been very anti-phone and very pro-email, but we have a handful of customers that have been reporting very interesting SMS stories. I think I'm still very skeptical of breaking ice with SMS, but I think it's the things we're hearing and customers are showing and reporting back to us about their success with SMS is undeniable. And so it's got us thinking about, I don't want to provide a way for people to start breaking ice over SMS, but once you are in contact with a candidate, using SMS to better communicate or keep them up on opportunities or check in with them, I think is absolutely the future.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to have their own personal opinions of it. I think we've noticed SMS across the firm is that once you're engaged, it's people usually prefer it. Not everybody. So I know there's going to be someone out there listening to this I hate getting SMS messages, but on average, most do. But it's at that point, though, you should already have the relationship in place where if it's not the way someone prefers to get communicated with, then that's not the way you're going to go. But we've noticed that it's faster to get the next interview set up, to get the debrief feedback, all that stuff that's kind of further along in the recruitment process when you're trying to partner with the job seeker or the candidate. It's just a better way of going about it typically in most cases.
Yep.
Okay.
And I agree with that, and we're seeing that.
Is there any, I guess the one thing I want to talk about too, because you mentioned this a little bit, is that LinkedIn has definitely changed, and I don't know if this is one of the not the main reason why you kind of started your company, but one of the big drivers for, because I know you don't want to talk too much about, but you get data from lots of different sites that aren't LinkedIn primarily, correct? So there's 30 some different sites, and that's like when you talk about making kind of these engagement and interaction, it's a way of kind of pulling insights for what someone's actually up to and what they're doing on something other than LinkedIn. I found it the change in LinkedIn that's been interesting is that I think the overall popularity has definitely gone up in the last 2 years, while at the same time the popularity within the tech community has gone down. Which is kind of crazy to me. So like you were saying, like the amount of tech people who just aren't even updating, their last company was 2 companies ago, whereas it seems like marketing, sales, HR, recruiting, some other areas, like they're all over LinkedIn right now, more so than they ever have been.
Yeah, myself included. Someone said to me the other day, like, find me a tech person in your news feed on LinkedIn that's talking about something. Posting about something.
I think product people are on there, but that's about it. Like the technical, the thought leadership types of people actually building products, like they're on LinkedIn. But I can't remember the last time I saw an actual developer posting anything. Maybe a couple of data focused people, but again, like those are more people who are more the business types that are talking about that type of aspect. So, what I guess kind of when we're talking about some of these other things too, is there what I've always found interesting. We don't come from the most innovative industry, and I can say this with a half smile on my face. I think that one of the challenges in recruiting is we're having this conversation because people have been so slow to adapt to people's communication patterns. Where have you looked for, I guess, inspiration in terms of? Do you look at other industries? Like what else? Like for me, that's what it is. I like looking and see what other marketers are doing to try to understand. Like I don't want to look at other recruiting firms to see how Hirewell should change. I want to look at companies in marketing and parts of technology. What do you look at? What's been your inspiration for some of the stuff you guys are doing?
Great question. I mean, I think tech. Obviously, I've worked in tech my whole life and always had a lot of respect for working with engineers and just very much understanding that they're building our future. So I think tech very broadly, but specifically within the tech industry, I'm seeing a trend of over my career of 10, 12 years or so in tech recruiting, engineering has swallowed up a lot of business functions like QA. When 10 years ago, it was like test-driven development. Like we shouldn't pass our app or code to QA. We should just work with them and test it as we build it. And same thing with design. We shouldn't throw wireframes back and forth. Let's just have a few designer front-end folks on the team. And network and server people are now DevOps people on engineering, and product is the new staple within engineering. I think the best tech companies, you're seeing engineering eat recruiting, and engineering leaders start to be way more sophisticated with how they're thinking about tackling recruiting. So that broadly was definitely an inspiration to me. I think
when you say engineering and recruiting, what do you mean specifically?
I mean the function, the organization of engineering, the CTO's organization is taking over a lot of functions that weren't run by tech people before, but tech people are running better than heroic non-tech people. I like the saying of like, be a scientist, not a hero. And I think a lot of these traditionally heroic functions are getting challenged by tech. And when tech proves to be better, they're getting overrun by tech. And I think there's a huge breakdown within highly technical leaders trying to work with non-technical recruiters, and they have the best of intentions, but there is a breakdown there. And so that's just one more broad directional inspiration, but I see tech taking other functions and making them more data-driven and more technical, and less, heroic of it works this way because it's always worked this way. Like, no, why? What's working and what's not, and let's measure it and have proof. And so I think, generally speaking, that's inspired me of let's build tooling and ways to help engineering leadership get more involved. But my business partner, H, who was my boss at Groupon, he ran tech recruiting for many years at a company in town called DRW Trading. And I think the high frequency industry, which very, I have a very elementary understanding of, but essentially they're gathering public data from the internet to make sense of it and make trades or bets based on, getting ahead of this information. And I think that's very much the opportunity I saw within recruiting, is everybody is copy and pasting LinkedIn profiles into an ATS that are then out of date and constantly kind of going back and forth between these systems. And LinkedIn, their algorithm runs our lives. We search for Python and get our results and then call based on that. And there's so much more data that's changing all the time.
There's so many, every time I talk to people on our tech recruiting team, there's so many niche sites that people use that are, off the beaten path that most people don't even know about exist, that can be used to find the tech talent and stuff like that. So finding ways to pull all that data from those, and that's ultimately what you guys are doing. But that's what I found was interesting. So it's kind of cool that you pulled that kind of like from the trading industry and kind of what those guys do. So
yeah, and I mean it's very complex when you think about it in light of the trading industry. But the idea of static human data is super valuable when you don't have any at all. But now that everyone has the same data, having this edge of how that data is changing day over day allows you to really run circles around the recruiters that are still focused on the static state of it.
And kind of bring things full circle too, because I've always thought that, I was talking about stuff that, like on my side, I talk about how like following marketers is really what kind of inspires me with how where we want to take things with Hirewell. Part of that came from because, roughly around the same time you were starting your firm, we started doing marketing recruiting. And I started learning so much about marketing in general from talking to marketers every single day. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I had the idea we should start doing that here. You know what I mean? Why are we see all these companies doing these who never really did a lot of marketing, doing these full digital transformations and doing more content, all these types of things, and realizing that we're missing opportunity if we don't, kind of jump in with both feet here. What was interesting is that the first video I posted on LinkedIn was actually in for a American Marketing Association event. I did a public speaking engagement with them back in like March or something like that. It was just to promote it. But within that presentation, I was talking about to a crowd of people who are job seekers looking to hire within marketing and what everyone's looking for. And it's like a catchphrase I use around the office that I use as a joke at this point, but data-driven storytellers. Everyone wants every marketer to be both data-focused and able to tell a story. Someone who understands kind of what data you have and what insights you can pull from that, then how you can actually communicate that to other people. And I think it's interesting because like you have that data-driven element, and then it still comes down to if every recruiter has the same data and knows the same data points, who's the best storyteller? Who can actually tell the most compelling message? And that's why I think that I saw a post that someone said that recruiting is no longer an HR function; it's a sales function. I'm like, recruiting's never been an HR function. Like it's always been a sales function. But I think it's becoming a marketing function. It's coming down to who's actually the best communicator, who can write the best copy, who can give the most compelling message. And then if you can base that on data, especially if it's data that somebody else doesn't have or someone else is too lazy to get on their own, I think that's really can be what's going to set apart the recruiters who are next level versus everyone else who's just doing everything the same way.
I agree. And I would, slice it a little differently of people are just like, we're at the end of this email era of being manipulated and lied to over email. And all these companies are at scale blasting you emails that are meant to get them more business. And everyone's just done with that. And I think storytelling is absolutely the differentiator. And it's so funny because we set out to do these predictions, which are so different and so cool and give a recruiter such an edge, but our prediction isn't that valuable if you send a bad email on top of it. You need to tell a good story with it, and that's the irony of it, of getting an edge by knowing who might be more in the market is absolutely an edge, but if you're going to send them the spam that all the recruiters send, knowing that isn't much of value at all.
It's interesting because I think it's the same challenge a lot of other industries are having now. How do you communicate better? And there's a lot of people think you'll just hire someone to do the writing, but they don't have the domain knowledge. Like the only person who has the domain knowledge and like what you are recruiting for is you. Like it has to be something that if you're a business owner, or in this case, if you're a recruiter running your own desk, like you have to take a vested interest in improving your writing skills and your communication skills to be better articulate so people know what you're talking about, because that's really what's going to set you apart. So
Yeah.
Anyways.
I mean, I think the best lens is think about your own email inbox. Think about an email that floored you recently. Like, they're few and far between. But when someone writes you an email that they did research and they say some real, like, not salesy business stuff, and you feel something like, I don't get those emails a lot, but when I do, I always respond to them.
Yeah.
And recruiters aren't sending them. Send more of them.
You get suckered sometimes. And
Exactly.
you're like, I think this might be a template, but it's good.
Yeah. But when it's even if it is good, if it's a template, I'm like, pass.